Hello, it's a beautiful autumnal day and I'm not very far from my home. I'm actually in the middle of the Lincolnshire Wolds and I'm in a tiny place called Kelstern. There's not very much in Kelstern apart from this large house here, which within is an Elizabethan house that belonged to the South family. We'll see some of those monuments in a minute, and the little church of St Faith. And there's this nice little park just around the house. So I'm just going to take you on a little tour of St Faith's Church in Kelstern. So let's go up the churchyard path through an arch made by some lovely old yew trees and heading up towards the north porch of the church. It's a Victorian porch, but it is a lovely medieval building, mostly of the 14th century. So in we go through this porch. We go through a restored, but perhaps a 13th century style door, if nothing else. Oh, my door's a bit stiff. There we go. Struggling here to get in. It's not a very well visited church, this, which is such a shame because it has some really very special features indeed. So coming into the west end of the nave, no aisles here in this church, just a nave and chancel, a west tower and a vestry to the north of the chancel. So looking east, it's a mostly Victorianised interior. Some Victorian glass. But there are some really very interesting things in here. And the prize among them is this very wonderful alabaster monument of the early 17th century that commemorates Elizabeth South, Dame Elizabeth South, she is called on her monument, who is the wife of Sir Francis South. And she appears to have died in childbirth. We see here, it's on the south wall of the nave. There is the image of Dame Elizabeth seated. She has an egg timer in her hand. She has her foot upon a skull, memento mori. Remember to die. There's her foot on the skull. Panning up to see her figure. Wonderful ruff around her neck. She has a hood. And she was a young woman who died in childbirth. And her baby, her swaddled baby, is in a little cradle at her feet, which is a very poignant thing indeed. And the monument was erected by her husband. There's some other details. It's actually in a very, very poor state now. There's lots of salt being pushed through the monument because it's a very damp church. So you can see at the top here of the alabaster monument. There's a sundial and the tree of life. And as well as the skull, originally there were two on either side, two figures of putti, holding more memento mori, more symbols of death, one with an extinguished torch. But these have got damaged and they appear to have been removed. Now I have no idea where they are, whether they've been stolen, let's hope not, or whether they've been taken away for repair. Now I'm going to splice in a photograph of this monument that I took about 15 years ago, which shows it more or less complete with those putti. So Dame Elizabeth South's monument. And then Sir Francis South, who lived in that house we saw before, then married again and lost his second wife. And on the north wall of the nave is her monument, Dame Anne South. Just here with the armorial achievements at the top. So turning round to look west towards the tower, there's the tower arch, the 14th century tower arch. And then there are a number of surviving late medieval bench ends just here. If I can very gently come back for a moment and show you these. It's this lovely one here, really rustic work, probably late 15th, early 16th century. And we've got what appears to be a hound chasing a hare. Most of them are plain, and on the other side we've got Reynard the fox. There's a bird on top of him, which is rather fun. I hope you can see it in this light, and we're getting a bit of glare. So really nice little rustic bench ends. Let's turn around to look east. That's Elizabeth South Monument, and there's a 13th century font. And then there are 3 windows here by the 20th century designer Sir Ninian Comper. I'm just going to go further east to show you the first. Just looking into the chancel as we go. There's not much to see in the chancel. Everything's in the nave in this church. They will pop up there in a minute. And there are 2 windows by Sir Ninian Comper on the north side. The first one here dates from the 1920s. And there are figures of St Andrew, St Faith, the patron of this church, and St George. And this is a memorial to a quite extraordinary man. The inscription at the bottom says, dedicated in loving memory of Sir George Frederick Slight, Knight and Baronet, J.P., Justice of the Peace, Lord of the Manor of Kelstern, at rest on the 19th of March 1921, in the 69th year of his age. Now, Sir George Slight was a self-made man. He grew up in absolute poverty, and he was in fact a cockle picker on the Lincolnshire coast when he was a child. But by good luck and business acumen, he built up a huge business, the largest fishing business in the whole of Britain. He had the largest fleet of steam trawlers by the time he died in 1921, and he was knighted and made a baronet, knighted in 1918, and made a baronet in 1921 because a lot of his trawlers were requisitioned in the First World War to be minesweepers. And he brought with his wealth both Wheelsby Hall in Grimsby, but also Bimbrook Hall in this parish here. And the images of St Andrew, presumably a reference to his trade as a fisherman, St Andrew being a fisherman, and St George a reference to his name. So there's that window here in memory of this extraordinary man, George Slight, who's buried in the churchyard. And the window next to it is in memory of his wife, who's referred to as Dame Rebecca Slight, and is a beautiful, beautiful image of the Annunciation. Sir Ninian Comper's style is very characteristic. You can tell it a mile off. He has a great sense of colour, and usually he signs his work. Yes, here it is. He signs his work with a strawberry, which is his particular motif, and this window is dated 1953, so right at the end of Comper's career. And if we go on to the other side, and I hope you can see this in the light because it's going to be very difficult to see, is a third window by Comper, very late window by him. I'm not sure you're going to be able to see it very well because of the sun. And there are figures of St. Hubert, and on the left-hand side, St. Hugh of Lincoln and St. Francis, window of 1954 by Comper, in memory of George Frederick Slight, who is the son of Sir George Slight. Really are super windows. So just head east for a moment into the chancel. Now, this is a very, very remote spot. I do wonder about the future of this church. A lot of churches in Lincolnshire have an uncertain future. They have very small, or actually in many cases non-existent congregations. It's a very sparsely populated place. And sadly, this church is in a bit of a state. It suffers extensively with issues of damp, which is why all the plaster's been taken off the chancel wall here. But it is a little gem of a church, and well worth seeking out if you find yourself in Lincolnshire. So this is St. Faith's Church in Kelstern in the Lincolnshire Wolds. Thanks very much for watching. Bye for now.